While Valerie was busy building her little kingdom, I was quietly assembling her arrest file, one gazebo at a time. For half a year, I watched this woman turn my grandfather's sacred fishing lake into a luxury playground, charging strangers $500 a night to sip champagne where my family had grieved, celebrated, and found peace for 6 decades. Valerie Cross, HOA president, forged permit specialist, and full-time land thief, was convinced she'd found the perfect target in some weekend electrician who didn't understand modern community development. What she didn't realize was that every illegal dock she threw up, every bogus guest she welcomed, and every dollar she skimmed was stacking up into another federal felony count with my name front and center on the witness list. While Valerie played resort tycoon on land she'd stolen from me, I was discovering that the FBI takes interstate commerce fraud extremely seriously. Where are you watching this from, by the way? Drop a comment below because you're about to see the most satisfying federal takedown of a suburban tyrant I've ever had the pleasure of setting up. Let me paint you the picture of how this entire nightmare began. No, my name's Alex, and I inherited a gorgeous 200-acre spread from my grandfather when he passed away 3 years ago. Grandpa Frank was a World War II vet who came home in 1945 and decided he'd had his fill of crowds and noise. He bought this land for practically nothing back in the 60s and spent the next 40 years putting up a modest cabin with his own 2 hands. Every nail, every board, every stone in that fireplace was placed by him. The crown jewel was a pristine 40-acre lake, spring-fed, crystal-clear water, wrapped in old-growth oak trees Grandpa refused to let anyone cut down. "Alex," he'd tell me as we fished off that weathered dock, "this place isn't just property. It's peace of mind." The metallic tang of his beat-up tackle box and the lingering scent of Old Spice in his cabin dresser still snap those memories into focus. Now, here's where things start to get messy. Over the years, suburbia crept closer and closer to Grandpa's hideaway. By 2018, rows of cookie-cutter houses boxed us in on 3 sides, and the new residents formed an HOA called Suncrest Ridge Community Association. I make my living as an electrician. Honest work that covers the bills. Every weekend, I drive out to the lake to escape the chaos, just like Grandpa taught me. That's when our villain walked in. Valerie Cross, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood queen. Picture someone who rolls up in a spotless white Lexus SUV, married to a city councilman, and genuinely believes she runs the entire zip code. This is the type of person who measures lawn height with an actual ruler and sends violation letters over unapproved mailbox paint. I'm talking full-blown suburban dictator. Valerie had tried several times to bully me into joining their HOA, even though my land sat completely outside their jurisdiction. "It's about community standards," she'd insist, her tennis shoes squeaking on the dock planks every time she showed up uninvited. "Your property impacts our values." The harassment started small. Valerie organized these volunteer cleanup days, where she'd march groups of neighbors onto my land without permission, insisting the lake was a shared community feature. When I called her out for trespassing, she actually had the nerve to toss around phrases like adverse possession and the greater good. So I did what any reasonable person in my shoes would do. I put up no trespassing signs around the entire perimeter. Clear, legal, impossible to misunderstand. Guess what happened? Valerie had them taken down overnight. Not ripped up, not tagged, professionally removed, like she already had the deed in her name. I sent her a certified legal notice laying out that she was trespassing and needed to knock it off immediately. Her reply was a bogus cease and desist letter claiming I was targeting her and interfering with community activities. Then the diesel smell from unknown construction equipment started drifting in at odd hours, along with a wave of petty harassment that would make a middle school bully proud. Noise complaints to the city about my loud fishing boat. False reports to the utility company about unsafe wiring in my cabin. Parking violation tickets on my own land, because apparently my truck qualified as abandoned if it sat in the same spot for more than 3 days. But Valerie Cross had no idea who she'd picked a fight with. See, Grandpa Frank didn't just teach me about fishing and honest work. He taught me to stand up to bullies, and he drilled one other lesson into me that turned out to be priceless. Always know exactly what you own and never let anyone convince you otherwise. The crunch of imported gravel under designer sneakers was about to become the soundtrack of Valerie's world collapsing. She assumed she was dealing with some weekend hobbyist who'd fold the second she waved official-looking paperwork at him. What she didn't understand was that this so-called weekend warrior had 40 years of Grandpa's wisdom behind him and absolutely nothing left to lose. 2 weeks after I mailed that legal notice, I headed out expecting a quiet Saturday morning of fishing. Instead, I rolled up to a full construction crew throwing together a massive dock extension out into my lake. They weren't just tweaking the old dock, they were putting up an entirely new commercial-grade structure. Composite decking, stainless steel railings, the works. I parked the truck and walked down, still trying to wrap my head around what I was looking at. The foreman, a decent guy named Eric, looked as puzzled as I felt when I introduced myself as the property owner. "Ma'am told us this was a community recreation facility," Eric said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Said she had all the permits." He handed me a stack of official-looking documents stamped with the header, Lakeside Haven Association. That's when the first mini-twist smacked me in the face. Valerie hadn't just overreached. She'd invented an entirely fake HOA entity. Same initials as the real Suncrest Ridge Community Association, SRCA. But this new Lakeside Haven Association, LHA, existed only on paper. And according to these forged filings, the LHA had claimed ownership of abandoned waterfront property. The smell of freshly cut lumber and the whine of power tools carried across water that had been quiet for 60 years. My grandfather's peaceful refuge was being turned into some kind of corporate boardwalk. "Eric," I said, holding up my phone with my property deed pulled up, "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but you're building on stolen land." The poor guy went pale. Turns out some paper pusher in city planning had rubber-stamped Valerie's permits without ever doing a site visit. Why would they? The paperwork looked legit. Survey signatures, environmental impact reports, the whole package. But here's where Valerie's arrogance started working against her. While Eric was explaining how his crew had been hired by this mysterious Lakeside Haven Association, guess who rolled up in that white Lexus? "Excuse me," Valerie snapped, stepping out in designer jeans and spotless hiking boots that had clearly never seen actual dirt. "But you're interfering with an approved construction project." And I held up my deed. "This is my land, Valerie. You're trespassing, and you're building without my consent." Her comeback? "I'll be filing a lawsuit for project delays and contractor interference." Then she turned to Eric and actually said, "Is there a manager I can talk to about this disruption?" Eric looked at me, then at her, and started laughing. "Lady, he is the manager. This is his property." That's when I threw my first real counterpunch. I immediately called the construction company's main office and faxed over my property documents. Work shut down within an hour, but Valerie wasn't finished. She threatened to sue me for malicious interference with legitimate business operations. So I did exactly what Grandpa would have told me to do. I got ahead of it. I filed a formal complaint with the city planning department, demanding a full investigation into how these bogus permits ever got approved. Then I had professional security cameras installed around the entire property line. If Valerie wanted to keep playing games, I was going to record every single move. The real kicker landed when I started digging into this Lakeside Haven Association. In our state, you can set up a business entity online for under $100 with a simple form. Valerie had filed incorporation papers 3 months earlier, naming herself president and listing my property address as the primary community asset. Here's your first knowledge nugget. Adverse possession laws say someone has to openly occupy your land for a set number of years, usually anywhere from 10 to 20 depending on the state, before they can even try to claim ownership. Someone can't just show up, file fake documents, and steal your property overnight. Takeaway, always check public records the moment neighbors start claiming authority over your land. The construction crew loaded up their gear, but Valerie's white Lexus stayed parked in my drive for another hour while she made furious phone calls. Through my new security cameras, I watched her waving her arms around, probably scrambling to understand how her flawless scheme had fallen apart so fast. What she didn't know was that this was only the opening round. Valerie had just shown me how far she was willing to go, and now I understood I wasn't dealing with everyday HOA overreach. This was organized fraud, backed by forged documents and phantom business entities. As Eric's crew strapped down their tools and pulled their trailers away, he walked over and handed me his card. Look, Alex, I'm sorry about the mess. If you ever want any legitimate work done, give me a call. And next time someone hires us for community property, we'll make sure to ask for real proof of ownership. The taste of coffee gone cold sat bitter on my tongue as I watched Valerie's Lexus finally vanish down the gravel road. But for the first time since this ordeal started, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. I should have realized that shutting down Valerie's dock project would only make her double down. 2 weeks later, I pulled into my drive and found landscaping crews putting up a massive gazebo where the old fishing pier used to sit. Not just any gazebo either. This was a professional-grade setup with built-in lighting, a stone fire pit, and what looked suspiciously like a commercial kitchen prep station. But the real gut punch was the signage. Heavy-duty metal signs posted all over the property. Dawn Shore Resort, Marlowe Inn. Exclusive lakefront retreat experience, complete with a phone number and website address. I walked over to the landscaping foreman, a guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I asked, "Hey, who hired you for this job?" "Lakeside Haven Association," he muttered, still avoiding eye contact. "Lady in the white SUV said this was a rush job for the grand opening next month." Grand opening? I pulled out my phone and typed in the website. Sure enough, there was a fully functional resort booking page loaded with professional photos of my land and a rate sheet that made my jaw drop. $500 per night for glamping packages. $700 for premium lakefront suites. $1,000 for exclusive weekend retreats. Here's the mini twist that made my blood pressure spike. Valerie wasn't just using my property. She was exploiting my family's history. The website had a section titled Our Legacy, with photos she'd lifted straight from my social media. Pictures of Grandpa Frank in his army uniform, stories about him building the cabin with his own hands, even a shot of his Purple Heart medal I'd posted on Veterans Day. She was literally selling my grandfather's military service as part of her fake resort experience. The air reeked of fresh mulch and pricey landscaping chemicals as crews installed what looked like a full-blown professional irrigation system. These weren't hobbyists doing a weekend project. This was a full-scale commercial build-out going up on my land without my knowledge, let alone my consent. I got on the phone immediately with my attorney, a sharp woman named Dana who specialized in property theft cases. "Alex," she said after I laid everything out for her, "this isn't just trespassing anymore. This is structured fraud with criminal teeth." Dana broke down exactly how far Valerie had gone over the line. First, theft of intellectual property by using my family photos without permission. Second, running a commercial business without the proper licenses or permits. Third, consumer fraud by taking money from customers for services she had no legal right to offer. My counterattack hit fast and from several angles. First, I reached out to every single person who'd booked through the bogus website. "Hi, this is Alex, the actual owner of the property you reserved. I'm calling to let you know that Dawn Shore Resort is operating without my permission, and you should cancel your reservation immediately." Most people were understanding once I explained what was really going on. A few were furious, but at Valerie, not me, for conning them. One couple had already dropped a $500 deposit on their anniversary trip. Second, I filed a criminal complaint for theft of intellectual property, specifically for using my grandfather's military photos and service record. Using a veteran's images and medals for profit without consent can be a federal offense in certain circumstances. But this is where things got messy. When I went to the local police, the desk sergeant acted strangely uninterested. "Sounds like a civil issue to me," he said, barely glancing at my stack of evidence. Turned out the police chief Harlan played golf every Thursday with Valerie's husband, City Councilman Daniel Cross. Donna warned me that a civil lawsuit could drag on for years and drain tens of thousands of dollars. "The upside," she said, "is that Valerie's getting cocky. Every day she runs this fake resort, she's piling up more evidence against herself." That night, I sat on what remained of Grandpa's original dock, watching crews finish installing industrial-grade lighting around the property. The hum of generators echoed where loons used to call. The crisp, intimidating feel of legal paperwork weighed heavy in my hands as I reviewed Dana's strategy notes. Then Valerie made her worst move yet. She launched a whisper campaign around the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable and making threats. Several neighbors told me Valerie had warned them to steer clear of me because I was dangerous and possibly armed. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Defamation laws kick in when someone spreads false statements that damage your reputation. In most states, calling someone dangerous or unstable without proof counts as slander, especially if it hurts your business or personal relationships. Takeaway: document every single false statement. Defamation cases are much easier to win when you can show a clear record of the lies. As I watched the last landscaping truck roll out, leaving behind a piece of land I barely recognized, it hit me. Valerie hadn't just stolen my property use. She was now actively shredding my name to hide what she was doing. It was time to show her what a real threat looked like. 3 weeks after the landscaping crews finished desecrating my shoreline, I showed up to something that made every previous violation look tame. Actual resort guests had arrived. I'm talking high-end SUVs parked all over my driveway, Range Rovers, Teslas, even a luxury Sprinter van. Complete strangers lounged on my dock, sipping catered drinks served on white tablecloths. A professional photographer circled the area, snapping promotional shots, while Valerie led guided tours for well-dressed couples holding champagne glasses. I could hear her voice drifting across the water. And this is where our founder's grandfather built the original homestead, creating the authentic heritage experience that defines Dawn Shore Resort. I parked my truck and walked down toward the dock where a server in a crisp uniform was arranging artisanal cheese platters. The guests looked at me like I was some groundskeeper who'd wandered into their private event. "Excuse me," said a woman in designer yoga pants, "but this is a private function." "You're absolutely right," I replied, pulling out my property deed, "and this is my private land." The mini twist that nearly made me explode was overhearing Valerie explain her pricing structure to a potential client. She was charging premium rates for what she called the family legacy experience. An extra $200 per night for guests who wanted to hear the founder's grandfather's war stories, and $150 for exclusive fishing rights in the family's private lake. She was literally selling my grandfather's military past and charging extra just to fish in water that belonged to me. But the detail that really got my attention came from a corporate guest who casually mentioned they'd paid $3,000 for a weekend retreat package. Valerie bragged loudly that the profits were going toward funding her husband's upcoming mayoral campaign. She wasn't just stealing my property, she was using it to buy political influence. My counterstrike was sharp, polite, and very public. I approached the group of guests and introduced myself calmly. "Hi everyone, I'm Alex, the actual owner of this land. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you should know you're currently trespassing on private property." I showed them my deed, my tax records, and a photo of my grandfather in uniform, the same photo Valerie had stolen for her website. "This woman," I said, gesturing toward her, "is operating an illegal business on land she does not own." Reactions ranged from confused to horrified. A few guests were stunned. One couple had driven hours for their anniversary. Another was furious, demanding their money back. But once they heard the truth, most turned angry at Valerie for scamming them. "If you'd like to stay and enjoy the property legally," I told them, "I'd be happy to talk reasonable terms. But you should know this place has no business license, no insurance, and no legal right to be open." Valerie panicked. She grabbed her phone and called the police, claiming I was threatening paying customers and sabotaging her business. Officer Ramos arrived, thankfully not one of Chief Harlan's golf buddies, and Valerie immediately tried to have me arrested for trespassing on my own land. Officer Ramos took one look at my deed and Valerie's forged paperwork, then turned to the guests and said, "Folks, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings. This venue has no legal clearance to operate." Valerie wasn't done. 2 days later, she filed for a restraining order, claiming I was hostile toward her guests and destroying her livelihood. The judge denied it, but it still cost me time, money, and paperwork. Then came Valerie's next brilliant idea. She hired a private security guard to protect guests from the hostile landowner. The kid couldn't have been older than 20, wearing a Town Watch security uniform and looking deeply confused. "Hey man," he said when I arrived during a weekend visit, "I'm really sorry. My supervisor told me to keep people separated. I don't even know what this is about." Then he asked me if I knew any good fishing spots for when he brought his kids out. Meanwhile, the local news ran a story. Property dispute threatens new resort. Valerie played the role of the victim flawlessly, painting herself as a trailblazing female entrepreneur being harassed by an angry male landowner resistant to progress. Every interview she gave, every lie she told, every false claim she made, I recorded it all. The sound of industrial lawnmowers at dawn became my daily soundtrack. The hum of generators replaced birdsong. Sunscreen and diesel exhaust filled the air instead of lake breeze. But Valerie's arrogance was about to become her undoing. The breakthrough came from an unlikely ally. Valerie's neighbor, Mrs. Liang, an elderly accountant who'd grown suspicious about HOA finances. She knocked on my cabin door one evening, holding a manila folder stuffed with documents. "Alex," she said softly, "I think you should see this." Inside the folder was a financial bombshell. While reviewing public property filings for her own HOA concerns, she stumbled upon records showing that Valerie's real estate business, Cross Properties, wasn't just struggling, it was drowning. Valerie owed nearly $200,000 in back taxes, had defaulted on 3 commercial loans, and was weeks away from foreclosure. But here was the jaw-dropper. Valerie and her husband didn't own a home in Suncrest Ridge. They were renters. They'd lost their actual house 2 years earlier in bankruptcy. Mrs. Liang flipped through the documents with a grim expression. "She has been running the HOA presidency to collect fees from neighbors," she said, showing me forged deposit slips. 47 households paying $50 a month, going straight into her personal account. The resort income wasn't a side gig. It was Valerie's lifeline to avoid financial collapse. Every guest payment went straight to debt collectors and legal fees. When Dana saw the evidence, she shook her head. "Alex, this changes everything. Valerie isn't confident, she's desperate. And desperate people make mistakes." That's when Dana uncovered the legal loophole that would finish Valerie for good. There was a little-known state law on unauthorized commercial use of private land. Anyone running a business on someone else's property without permission owed triple damages, 3 times their earnings, plus attorney fees. Triple damages exist, Dana explained, because the law punishes intentional land theft harshly. But that wasn't the only door opening. The state attorney general had been tracking a series of similar resort scams across multiple counties. Valerie's operation matched the pattern perfectly. "We've been building a case for months," the investigator told Dana. "Your client's documentation might be the missing piece." Suddenly, I wasn't just protecting my land. I was helping expose a regional fraud ring. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something powerful. The shift from defense to offense. Sitting in Grandpa Frank's old cabin, surrounded by his medals and photos, I remembered something he once said. "Alex, when you're in a fight, the key isn't strength. It's knowing your enemy's weakness before they know yours." Valerie's weakness was her desperation. She needed my land to save herself financially, so she would keep escalating, keep lying, keep creating more evidence. My job was simple. Let her dig her own grave while I built the case. Over the next 2 weeks, I assembled what Dana jokingly called the Justice Squad, but it was anything but a joke. First on the roster was Dana herself, a property rights attorney with a reputation for going after fraudsters like it was personal. And in her case, it was. Her parents had been scammed by a corrupt HOA in Florida years ago, and she'd been sharpening her legal teeth on cases like this ever since. Next, we brought in Gregory Hale, a tax attorney recommended by the state bar. Gregory knew every dark alley in corporate tax law and had a unique talent for unraveling shell companies. He'd helped recover millions in stolen assets over his career, and he was fascinated by the level of deception Valerie had pulled off. Then came Detective Nina Ortiz, a private investigator with government ties who owed Dana a favor. Nina specialized in financial fraud schemes for insurance companies and had been quietly tracking similar pop-up resort scams across the state. Rounding out the team was Leah Donovan, a forensic accountant with a talent for following money trails through labyrinths of offshore accounts and business fronts. If Valerie had hidden a nickel somewhere, Leah would find it. But the most surprising addition was Mrs. Liang herself. Turns out she wasn't just a retired accountant. She had spent 40 years as an IRS auditor known for detecting financial manipulation that others overlooked. Alex, she said with a gentle smile as she spread documents across my table, this woman has been committing fraud for so long she probably can't tell real income from fake anymore. Our strategy formed in phases. Phase 1, a documentation blitz. Every guest, every transaction, every false statement Valerie uttered had to be recorded and cataloged. Nina set up high-grade surveillance equipment capable of capturing license plates, faces, and audio from hundreds of yards away. We created a shared database logging every individual who'd been defrauded, every dollar Valerie collected, and every misrepresentation she'd made. Phase 2, agency coordination. Gregory filed complaints with the State Tax Authority, the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, and the State Tourism Board for unlicensed commercial activity. Leah submitted detailed financial reports to the IRS outlining unreported income and tax evasion. Dana worked with the state investigator to ensure our evidence linked perfectly to their larger probe. Phase 3, asset protection. We filed a lice pendens against Valerie's rental property. It's basically a legal flag telling any potential buyer or creditor that the property is wrapped up in a lawsuit. That meant Valerie couldn't sell, refinance, or disappear financially without triggering red flags. Phase 4, controlled public exposure. We planned to time maximum legal force with maximum public impact. Instead of shutting down Valerie's operation quietly, we would wait until her much-hyped grand opening event, the one she'd been advertising everywhere, and then serve everything in front of witnesses, media, and law enforcement. Mrs. Liang explained it perfectly as she sifted through Valerie's tangled financial records. She thinks she's playing a simple board game, she said, adjusting her reading glasses. But we're playing a match she doesn't even know the rules to. Our surveillance network was surprisingly low-tech, but effective. We disguised professional trail cameras as birdhouses and tree monitors, each equipped with night vision and motion sensors. Leah built spreadsheets tracking every guest arrival, payment, and activity. I recorded every conversation I had with Valerie using a phone app, completely legal in our single consent state. But the emotional prep was 10 times harder than the legal prep. I spent hours in Grandpa's cabin, surrounded by his medals and old belongings. In one drawer, I found his purple heart wrapped in faded tissue paper next to a letter from his commanding officer praising his integrity under pressure. I sat there for a long time, the scent of old pine and leather filling the room. "Grandpa," I said quietly into the stillness, "I promise I'll protect what you built, and I'll do it the right way." The shift inside me was unmistakable. For months I'd felt cornered, reacting to everything Valerie threw at me. Now I had a plan, a team, and the patience to let her be the architect of her own downfall. Dana summed it up during our final team meeting. "Alex, the thing about fraudsters is they always believe they're the smartest person in the room. Valerie is going to escalate because she can't help herself. All we need to do is document everything and wait for the right moment." Gregory added his own perspective. "In cases like this, timing determines the severity of charges. We could bring this down today, but the criminal penalties would be smaller. If we wait for her grand opening, the charges triple." The sound of legal documents flipping became my nighttime soundtrack as we fine-tuned every detail. Valerie thought she was building a thriving resort empire on land she'd hijacked. In reality, she was building an airtight criminal case, one that would swallow her whole. That's when Valerie's desperation took on a new reckless edge. The first incident hit when I took my boat out early one Saturday. The engine sputtered and died halfway across the lake. When the mechanic checked it, he found sugar in the gas tank. A classic sabotage move that could have left me stranded or damaged the engine beyond repair. But thanks to Nina's cameras, we had crystal clear footage of none other than Daniel Cross sneaking onto my property at 2 a.m. carrying a bag of granulated sugar. The night vision even caught him fumbling around the boat, trying to figure out which cap led to the gas tank. Apparently, city councilmen weren't well versed in boating basics. Next, someone started vandalizing my security cameras, spray painting the lenses or pointing them toward the trees. But our hidden cameras caught everything. Valerie herself, dressed in black yoga pants and a hoodie, crawling around my property like some kind of bargain bin spy. The woman who lectured neighbors about roof shingle colors was creeping through my brush with a can of spray paint at midnight. Then came the bureaucratic harassment. Anonymous complaints piled up: unsafe septic system, illegal electrical work, abandoned vehicles. City inspectors kept showing up, embarrassed but required to investigate. One spent 3 hours scrutinizing my grandfather's handcrafted stone fireplace before admitting he couldn't find a single violation. But the digital attacks proved Valerie was spiraling. Fake reviews popped up on every platform: Google, Yelp, TripAdvisor, Facebook, all describing me as violent, dangerous, unstable. But Nina traced every review back to the same IP address, Valerie's own home network. She hadn't even bothered masking her tracks. That's when Daniel made their boldest mistake. He rolled up to my cabin in a golf cart, white polo and khakis, trying to look diplomatic. He offered a partnership, 50/50th profit split, acknowledgement of my property rights, and full handling of operations by them. But when I asked for real financial records, he started hiding behind proprietary information. When I refused, his entire demeanor shifted. "Look," he said, voice dropping, "you can make this easy or hard. We have city connections. Eminent domain isn't off the table." Then he hinted at a campaign they'd been building, labeling me mentally unstable, implying I was a danger, claiming neighbors had documented concerns. He suggested that if I didn't cooperate, I might be involuntarily committed for evaluation. What he didn't know was that I had been recording the entire conversation on Dana's advice. Every threat, every bribe attempt, every implication of political leverage, all captured in perfect audio. My counterpunch was quiet but devastating. Nina and I started contacting honest city employees who were disgusted by the corruption. We found a building inspector named Harris who'd been pressured to falsify violations and was ready to testify. Meanwhile, Leah uncovered that Valerie had funneled resort income through 3 shell companies to hide it from creditors and taxes. Every fraudulent payment was now a piece of evidence. But the best part was watching Valerie's ego swallow her whole. Resort bookings surged. She landed a profile in a regional tourism magazine. She publicly announced expansion plans: a spa, a wedding venue, corporate retreat facilities. In interviews, she described herself as an environmental visionary. She even applied for a $50,000 state tourism development grant using forged ownership documents and bogus environmental studies. Every lie she broadcasted became another nail in her legal coffin. Every fabricated detail became evidence. Every boast tightened the trap, and I could feel the end coming. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty that had weighed on me for months finally began to dissolve. Valerie wasn't just stumbling. She was sprinting straight toward the edge. Too arrogant to realize she'd built the cliff herself, Valerie's final act of desperation hit like a coordinated political smear campaign. She launched a barrage across Facebook, Instagram, and Nextdoor, painting me as a dangerous figure harassing a hardworking female entrepreneur. The posts were crafted with algorithm-baiting precision, complete with captions like, "Local man threatens resort guests," and "Unstable landowner poses safety risk." My personal favorite, "Community urged to demand mental health intervention before someone gets hurt." She used clipped out-of-context videos and staged photos to make me look hostile. But her biggest blunder came when she tried to rally local support. She organized what she called a community safety forum at the HOA clubhouse, gathering about 30 residents, most of whom had never spoken to me but were panicked by her online hysteria. She passed around a petition demanding my removal from the neighborhood for public safety concerns. The mini twist that almost made me laugh was when she contacted Channel 9 News with her dramatic tale of being tormented by a territorial landowner. She handed them carefully edited footage portraying every interaction as threatening. The segment aired that Thursday night. Small business owner claims harassment amid property dispute. Valerie cried on camera, calling herself a pioneer in ecotourism whose dreams were being crushed by a hostile local man. But what she didn't know was that Donna had already sent that same reporter our full evidence file. The follow-up story they were preparing was nothing like the flattering piece Valerie expected. Meanwhile, Daniel was doing his part, leveraging his city council connections to pile on the pressure. Police received anonymous reports alleging I had made violent threats against local officials. My employer received calls questioning whether I was mentally stable enough to perform electrical work safely. Things escalated when Valerie filed paperwork attempting to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. She claimed I'd made violent threats, suffered from paranoid delusions about property ownership, and posed a clear danger to resort guests. The most terrifying part was how close she came to pulling it off. Mental health warrants often require very little evidence, and Valerie had spent months building a fake record through edited videos, neighbor statements, and manufactured incidents. But by that time, my counteroffensive was already locked in. Detective Nina had connected me with a state investigator named Agent Rivera, who specialized in complex fraud operations. We organized every bit of evidence, financial documents, surveillance footage, audio recordings, forged permits, into a prosecutorial masterpiece. Agent Rivera told us Valerie's scam matched a pattern they'd been tracking: fake land claims, fabricated tourist businesses, unlicensed operations, targeted victims. "She's hit at least 6 people," he said, "but you're the first one who fought back systematically." The federal angle came when Leah discovered that Valerie had been moving money through banks in 2 different states to hide her profits. Interstate financial activity turned her crimes into federal offenses, giving the IRS and FBI jurisdiction. But the most satisfying twist was watching Valerie's media manipulation crumble. The Channel 9 investigation team did their homework. Their follow-up piece wasn't just critical, it was catastrophic for her narrative. "We've got everything," Dana said at our last strategy meeting. "Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, property theft, defamation, extortion. This is federal prison time, not a civil squabble." The weight that had been dragging me down for months lifted. Valerie's desperate escalation had sealed her fate. Every fake report, every social media lie, every police complaint, every news interview had created a flawless paper trail of her own criminal activity. The irony was cinematic. The same lies she used to destroy my reputation would now dismantle hers. 3 days before the grand opening of Dawn Shore Resort, Agent Rivera called. "We're ready. Federal warrants are approved, state charges filed, seizure orders prepared. We just need the right moment." Valerie thought she was on the verge of her biggest triumph. In reality, she was about to walk into her own public destruction. The grand opening of Dawn Shore Resort looked like a glossy ribbon cutting straight out of a tourism magazine. Valerie had invited the mayor, several city council members, the Chamber of Commerce president, and around 50 local business leaders. Photographers snapped pictures as she strutted around in a bright white blazer, beaming. A satin ribbon stretched across my grandfather's dock. A news crew adjusted their lighting, ready to broadcast her success story to the whole county. "Ladies and gentlemen," Valerie announced with perfect confidence, "welcome to the future of sustainable tourism. Dawn Shore represents harmony between nature and economic opportunity." The smell of upscale catering wafted through the air as guests mingled over champagne, on land they didn't know was stolen. That's when my team and I walked down the gravel driveway. Me, Dana, Gregory, Detective Nina, Agent Rivera, 2 more state investigators, and Sheriff's Deputy Collins carrying a stack of arrest warrants. Behind them came a forensic team with asset seizure paperwork. The news crew immediately swung their cameras in our direction, sensing something far juicier than a ribbon cutting. Valerie stiffened when she saw us approaching, but forced her smile back into place. "Folks," she said loudly, "please don't be alarmed by this individual. This is the landowner I mentioned. He's been dealing with some personal difficulties." I walked straight up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. Even the lake seemed to pause. "Good afternoon," I said. "My name is Alex Donovan, and this is my property. You are all currently trespassing at the grand opening of a completely illegal business." I held up my deed. "This land has been in my family for 60 years. This woman," I said, gesturing to Valerie, "has been running a fraudulent resort on my land for 6 months. No permits, no licenses, no insurance, no rights whatsoever." Whispers rippled through the crowd as Agent Rivera stepped forward. "Valerie Cross," he announced clearly, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to commit theft of services, and multiple counts of fraud." The click of handcuffs echoed across the lake. Valerie's face drained of color instantly. Gregory followed up with the civil side. Under state law, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, Mrs. Cross owes triple damages, 3 times every dollar she earned illegally, plus attorney fees and punitive damages, totaling approximately $400,000. The mayor began backing away from her immediately. The city had no knowledge of these activities. He insisted to the cameras, suddenly sweating. Business leaders hurriedly packed up their things. Guests demanded refunds. The entire event dissolved into chaos. Meanwhile, Deputy Collins intercepted Daniel Cross as he tried to escape in a golf cart. Watching a city councilman get arrested in a golf cart while wearing a polo shirt was something I'll cherish forever. The news crew captured everything. What was supposed to be a celebration, the reporter said into the camera, has turned into the largest fraud arrest this county has seen. As investigators sealed off the area and began tagging forged documents, I finally took a breath. The light on the water looked exactly the way it had when I was a kid fishing with Grandpa Frank. And for the first time in months, the lake sounded like itself. Quiet, peaceful, untouched. Justice tasted better than any champagne Valerie could have poured. 6 months later, everything had changed. Valerie was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, plus 3 years of supervised release, along with a restitution order of $300,000. Daniel lost his council seat and faced ethics violations that ended his political future. The state investigation exposed Valerie's fake HOA scam, and 47 neighbors recovered their stolen dues. Mrs. Liang was elected the new HOA president and immediately implemented transparency rules Valerie had dodged for years. I spent the first month after reclaiming my property, restoring everything to Grandpa's original vision. Every piece of Valerie's resort, gazebos, docks, lighting, landscaping, was removed. I replanted native wildflowers and young oaks. Rebuilding Grandpa's dock using his old design became a form of healing. Finding his original tackle box under the remains of Valerie's fake gazebo nearly brought me to tears. The best part? Turning justice into something good. I opened the Frank Donovan Veterans Retreat, offering free weekend stays for military families coping with deployment stress and PTSD. With help from local VFW chapters, we host around 20 families per month in the warm seasons. A scholarship fund in Grandpa's name, funded by Valerie's restitution, now helps children of deployed service members afford college. 12 scholarships awarded so far. We also created structured public access for environmental education and fishing programs. Local schools bring kids out to learn about wildlife, conservation, and water quality. Ironically, real ecotourism inquiries are now coming in. Licensed guides, nature photographers, responsible organizations who actually respect the land. Property values in the neighborhood even increased after Valerie's arrest. Apparently, a criminal enterprise next door is bad for home prices. Who knew? As for me, the whole ordeal awakened something unexpected. I now volunteer with the State Attorney General's office, helping others document fraud and navigate property rights issues. A book's worth of lessons came from this, but the essentials are simple. Verify claims through official records, document everything, involve state agencies when local authorities are compromised, and most importantly, never let bullies weaponize your ignorance. Last weekend, I sat on Grandpa's rebuilt dock at sunset, listening to the loons. His fishing rod rests against the cabin wall. His purple heart sits in a place of honor. The legacy he built, honesty, hard work, integrity, is stronger than ever. Valerie thought she could turn 60 years of family history into her personal cash machine. Instead, she reminded me of Grandpa's most important lesson. Protect what matters and serve something bigger than yourself. Next week, I'll tell you the story of the city official who tried to steal my neighbor's home using fake tax liens, and how we flipped his own corruption to expose a multi-million-dollar theft ring. Drop your worst HOA nightmare in the comments. I read them all, and yours might be featured in a future video. If this helped you understand your rights, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. Trust me, we're just getting warmed up. Remember, bullies count on silence. Don't give them the pleasure.